go. So thank you all very much for joining today to Unveiling ICANN's new gTLD program. My name is John Matson, and I want to cover some round one insights as well as round two. I know some of you, I don't know all of you, and I'm looking forward to meet you eventually. But a little background on me. So I grew up in the Midwest. I went to Purdue University to study mechanical engineering and fell in love with aerospace. And so there I also did research into solid rocket propellants and actually started my career out at the rocket facility at Edwards Air Force Base. And that's me standing in an F1 engine of an Apollo rocket motor back in the day. But I was in aerospace for several years and eventually became a partner with Ernst & Young, doing consulting services to the large, both North American as well as European aerospace. And I transitioned over to KPMG, and KPMG is actually where I met ICANN. I actually got a call from an aerospace partner who said there's this little company down in Marina Del Rey that needs some help. And I said, what do they need? He said, I don't know. So I went, and that's how it started, and I'll get more into that later. But I live in Southern California, half-time. I got two boys, 21 and 24. I enjoy golf, and I enjoy tinkering with old go-kart Porsches, 914s. And then I live the other half the time in Canada, and that's where I'm coming today. That's where I am. I am on an island out in the Bay of Fundy. So admit another one. Now, let's get into what I want to talk about today. Some of my experiences, just to let you know that for the last 16 years or so, I've pretty much been dedicated to the internet infrastructure and did planning projects with KPMG, of which one of my colleagues, Mike Salazar, is on the on the line with us here. Did some benchmarking work and other things for industry. Did the strategic plan for ICANN for a few years before the new gTLD program launched, and then supported over 20 applicants in that first round. Assisted .art in launching and managed a channel for 31 gTLDs for MMX. And all the while doing that work, I also worked with ccTLDs doing strategic plans and marketing and other things like that. But most recently, with honestly some of the stagnation in the new gTLD program, Web3 began coming up with some innovation, obviously online, and have been spending some time over there. And we'll talk about that as well. Simplest way to say it is that the applicant guidebook changed my life. I read it for the first time in 2008, and this was kind of the way I looked at the world then. This was what we knew to be the internet infrastructure. .com had 80 million domains. There was 21 other gTLDs that had 25 million domains. And then ccTLDs had about 65 million. So there was maybe 250 million or 300 TLDs at the time, about 170 million total domains. And what the guidebook said was that they were going to open up the namespace and allow choice and encourage diversity and encourage new use cases on the internet. And that just fired my imagination. I saw this and actually, did a doodle, and this was what I drew after I read the applicant guidebook. I said, okay, you're going to be able to have TLDs by hobby, by sport, by passion, by brand, by industry, by culture, geography, by anything. And how many are we going to have? Well, didn't really know at the time, but thought maybe, we got 300 existing gTLDs. Maybe there'll be another 300 gTLDs, at most 500. But how many domain names? Don't know. Will we have anything that rivals.com? Probably not, but at least there'll be things that people will be passionate about. And so I actually began to move away from all the aerospace consulting I did and exclusively moved into the internet infrastructure in 2010 and have been here ever since. So the AGB actually did change my life. Some people don't know much about the DNS, so I wanted to have a little at the beginning, some domain name 101. So DNS, domain name system, it's two unique identifiers, human labels, human readable domain names, and they match to internet protocol or IP addresses. A TLD is a top level domain. The legacy TLDs would be things like .com. Then there's new gTLDs, example.app. And then there's CCTLDs, which are the two-letter, and there's several hundred of those. An SLD or second level domain would be like John Matson. And when you combine that with a TLD, you get johnmatson.consulting. And yes, I am a user. That identifies me. And that's what gets you about domain names is identification. And I love that that's my domain name because that's what I am and who I am. A registry is a TLD factory for domain names. A registry cannot sell directly to the public. They must go through a channel. And those channels are registrars. A distributor for domain names, and that'd be somebody like a GoDaddy. The domain registration process is an important part of this discussion today. And so essentially what happens is you search for a name. That name, you register it, normally at a discount at a registrar. You come up and do a first renewal, and normally you finally pay full price. So that first renewal is a critical decision point on the value of that domain name. And then you get a second renewal through end renewals, however long that domain is in use, hopefully has a website attached to it or some other functionality, and then it gets deleted. Also, ICANN coordinates the global community, and their view is one world, one internet. Also, I want to do domain names 102, which is just to talk a little bit about the fundamental business model of a registry. So a registry starts out and eventually has some amount of domains. And let's just say at the end of 2023, I have 100 domains. Going into 2024, I'm going to have a certain amount of renewals. And those renewals are going to be based on the domains that I have in inventory. Some of those are not going to renew. Those are going to be deletes. And those will be taken out of my inventory, and I'll get no revenue for those. In parallel to that process, I'm pursuing new creates. I'm selling new domains through the registrar channel. And those are normally now at a discount, and discounting has become a big part of it. But those then together at the end of the year add with the renewals to create what is my resultant domains under management by year end. And then that's what I start the next year with. Now I bring this up because there are important metrics associated with running a registry. One of the most critical is renewal rates, because the higher your renewal rate, you get to build an annuity business. And the renewal rate is calculated by simply taking the renewals divided by the number of domains that could have renewed. In this example, 74 of the 100 renewed, so that's 74%, which just happens to be what .com's average renewal rate's been for decades. Now, this also plays into performance. Year-over-year performance, there's two characteristics, deletes and creates. If my deletes are greater, or if my creates are greater than my deletes, I grow. However, if my deletes are greater than my creates, I shrink. And that is the fundamental balance that every registry tries to manage. And sometimes you get to a point that the market won't support growing past your number of deletes, and you now are flat. And several registries, including .com, has reached that. .com has been flat since 2021. And so it's a market characteristic that is concerned, obviously, if you want to grow. So now let's look at the overall impact. If we look at what round one could have done, the scenarios are it could have grown the pie of domain names. We were at 250 million domain names roughly in 2012, and what could it have grown to? Would it grow faster? Or it was going to cannibalize names, that were out there currently, TLDs, or it was going to have no impact. Well, essentially, this is what has played out over time. Domain names have grown from 250 million in 2012 to a little over 360 million in 2023. If you stack it up, .com has the largest share, right at about 160 million domains. .net has about 15, other legacy 28, and then new gTLDs have about 37 million now, 35 million at the end of the year. And then ccTLDs make up the bulk. But if you look at the characteristics in this chart, you'll see that other legacy began to shrink a little bit from where they were, as well as net, just slightly. And com has flattened off. But if you look at the top line, you really don't see a grow the pie beyond what was happening before. So essentially, I'll say, okay, scenario one didn't really happen. It didn't really add new demand. But also, if you see the size of that green swath, it's not that it also didn't have an impact. So I would say essentially that it cannibalized what was already there, and it shifted domains that would have been sold out of com or out of the new or the legacy or CCs into this swath, with a little bit of growth, but not necessarily significant. So let's look at round one by the numbers. What happened? So round one had 1,930 applications, which was huge. I think when we were planning this and planning capacity for the evaluation panels, we were talking in the hundreds. And Mike Salazar, who's here, emotionally went through that process of doing it. But Donut surprised us all with 307, which is about $56 million worth of application fees. Google had 101, Radix 31, some of the big ones. There was 234 contention sets, and a contention set is more than one applicant for a string, of which 17 were resolved via the ICANN auction of last resort. Now 197 were self-resolved, mostly through private auctions, and we're going to talk about that a little later. And 3 are still in process. 9 were not approved in evaluation, either to technical reasons like corp, home, and mail, for concerns of collision or disruption due to internal networks. And then there was some GAC objections. Now, if we look at delegation, there's 135 or 1,235 delegated by ICANN. And what happened is, Sandy, I see your question. Google was unusual in bringing so many forward. That was quite a surprise, but we'll talk about that more in the question, sorry. If we then look at how these delegated out over time, the first were delegated in October of 2013 after the evaluations were done. So it took about a year to get to the first evaluations done. And those were a Chinese IDN, 2 Russian, and Arabic. But then over the next 3 years, things played out where 300 to 400 a year were processed. And just recently, .music and .kids. So you can see over a 10-year horizon, it's taken to get all these out. Need to keep that in mind because although ICANN wants to go faster, if they don't, this is what you could experience if you're an applicant. So now let's just look at domain counts. So there's 37 million domains currently, and this is how they profile. This is commonly how people look at them at ntldsstats.com. The problem with just looking at domain totals is you don't really get insight about the mechanics of the TLD or the registry itself. And I really want to change that. And so I want to share with you some ways of looking at these differently that give more insight as to how the business model of that TLD might be performing. Because right now, if I look at .apps or .sbs or .cfd, I can't really tell, are those different than each other as to how they behave in the market? Well, I think you'll see that they are very, very different. So what I've done is VeriSign through the domain name information brief or industry brief, DNIB, dnib.com, they've now made available a significant amount of data related to the entire global domain industry. And so I was able to go off and pull statistics now by TLD, by renewal rate, by deletes, actually by new creates and others. But here we're going to look at that same chart before, which was these 10 TLDs, but they look very different now. You'll see that .app has moved up to the third place because this is now ranked by how many of these possible renewed domains did renew. So XYZ only has an 18% renewal rate, whereas online has a 31% renewal rate. And the average for all gTLDs is 39%. And so that's something that as you develop your business plan going forward, you need to understand. And as it goes down, you'll see that as we get to the far right, there are some TLDs that have an extremely low renewal rate. And we tried some things actually at MMX with free domains. And we basically learned that if you don't have 7% renewal rate on even free domains, you're losing money because you don't cover your cost of operations as well as the ICANN fee. And you can see that .com being the reference, .com is at 74%. And there's only one of these 10 TLDs that actually achieved a 74% renewal rate. If we now look at registries in total, we can now see how the registries actually differentiate themselves in performance as well from round one. And what you'll see here is that only Google exceeds the .com reference. And that's primarily driven by .dev and .app, but they have 46 TLDs in total. But Identity Digital, they have 267 TLDs. They have the ability to have a much longer tail, and they have a fairly high renewal rate, much higher than the average. And because of their volume, they outdistance what I would say the competition in revenue because of the volume that they have of TLDs in the names. If you look at GoDaddy, GoDaddy has a moderate performance. They're above the renewal rate, and they've got the 39 TLDs. But then you have different business models on down because you're relying on a discounting process to get higher volumes through the door, and you're trying to make it work with a lower renewal rate. You can see XYZ falls all the way from the first position as a single TLD down to a registrar with only 18%, or a registry with only 18%. And then finally, ShortDot, which has 5 TLDs, they're much in a high volume game and yet to see whether or not they'll actually get the traction in the renewal rates. A different thing to look at, and again, we're just looking at a bunch of data from round one. These are city TLDs. So this is 20 city TLDs, and I wanted to find a way to give you some understanding as to how they're different. And how they're different is traffic. Normally, everything is ranked by domains under management, which you can see is this column here over towards the right. And yes, .Tokyo has the most with 108. And normally that would be then followed by .NYC, and then followed by Berlin, and then followed by London. But in reality, they behave differently. Tokyo has been able to have their users create websites that have significant traffic. So they have one website with between 5 and 10 million visitors a month. But then as it goes down, they have almost 90 websites that have 100,000 to 500,000. And then as it goes down. So they have a much larger participation of their user base of successful traffic generating websites. And that really measures the health of a TLD. And you can see that while others still have some distribution, none of these TLDs approach .Tokyo as to how they're performing. One of the other characteristics that you look at is the population per domain under management. So if you're doing a city TLD or a geo TLD in the coming round, you now have some benchmark data as to how to forecast or look at what you might get as volumes by population density and ratios based on performance of round one city TLDs. One other data point I wanted to address before we get into round two is looking at what I'll call the character penalty. And that is, we've always known that the length of a string, the shorter the better, says the guy with a .consulting domain name. I know. But shorter the better is true when it comes to domain names. And what I did was I took the top 10 new gTLDs that had 3 characters, and then the top 10 that had 4 characters, and then 5, etc., and took them and averaged those 10 to come up with a data point. And then what you see plotted here is, as you transition from 3 characters to 4 characters, the average number of domains in each TLD drops 31%. And then if you go from 4 characters to 5 characters, it drops another 35%. So going from simply 3 to 5 characters, you potentially lose 66% of your potential domain volume. And then there's not much difference from 5 to 6, but then 7 is another big step. And then as you get out to 9 characters, well, roughly 98% of the volume is gone. Now, there are pricing, there are many other factors that play in here, but this just really shows that if you can shorten your string, even, .dev and .app rather than .development, .application, those were straightforward. But if you can get creative and shorten your string, you may have the opportunity to get better results in round two. But round two is happening 12 years after. And, there wasn't an opportunity to get to gTLD for 12 years. So one of the things I did just quickly, I said, ChatGPT, what new tech and social trends have happened since 2012? And this is the list I got. So, some of you see yourselves in this and see what you're trying to do. And I'm sure that as we look at what is going to happen in round two, many of these areas are going to be driving strings or driving ideas. One area that I've spent time in is what's going on with Web 2 and Web 3. And I wanted to at least address this because I think it's going to be an important consideration as we look at Web 2 or as round two. There's basically 3 scenarios right now going on with Web 2 and Web 3. The first scenario is a duplicate scenario. And this would be something like Handshake, where there's a DNS TLD and there are blockchain TLDs or multiple blockchain TLDs in other chains as well. That's one scenario. There's a longer term scenario that says that can you get the domains or the TLDs to be peers or equal with each other so that a single user goes into a browser and the browser will automatically know which technology or protocol to go to. And that would be their peers are equal. And the third scenario is something that is synchronized or in sync, where there is still a representation of the same TLD in 2 different technologies, but they're synchronized. And the blockchain technology is enhancing the functioning of the DNS. So in the first one, the challenge is user confusion, right? There's duplicates. There may be a user getting to the wrong one. And those sorts of considerations are happening now. The second scenario, and some people on here, we've had conversations about this, that we would need to update the RFC that defines the DNS protocol. And people may not know that the actual original RFC by Paul Mockapetris in 1987 identified 4 protocols of technology to define a domain name. And so could there be a 5th added that would integrate a blockchain? Well, the IETF would have to take on that project, and that could take 10 years. So we're kind of left with, how do we create the process of being in sync and having a primary TLD that is linked to a secondary that brings new use cases to extend the DNS? Well, that's actually happening now as well. Because if we look, there are TLDs that are trying to extend beyond. Now, those of you familiar with MMX tried to do this in 2019 timeframe, linking .lux. However, the cost of transaction fees, the gas fees killed it, but it started. Currently, .art has just launched ID.art that fulfills the vision of what Olvi Kazimov wanted to do, which is create art objects or digital twins and capture the provenance by connecting that to the ENS records. And that's being rolled out currently. Also, .box just launched. And .box also is connecting a DNS TLD to crypto wallets. GoDaddy announced that they are getting into this business as well. And they now allow you to connect any domain name to an ENS wallet upon checkout. And then some people on the call here, Unstoppable, are also working to create that extended functionality by connecting DNS TLDs to crypto wallets, and then even looking in the application round for round 2. The reason why? Well, roughly 2024, there's 400 million crypto wallets. I don't know, by 2030, some have said there's 2 billion, but obviously a significant volume beyond the 350 million domain names that we may have, and a rich opportunity that people are looking at. So let's go look at round 2, the timeline. So this is what ICANN has announced, and we're sitting here today, and what they've said is that the applicant guidebook will be complete by Q2 2025. And the application window should open Q2 2026. Now, that gives us roughly 1 year to complete the AGB. There's a lot that has to get done. There's a lot that has to get sorted. If you talk to anybody in the ICANN community, they will have an opinion. Most likely they'll say, it might get delayed. But let's just plan for now that it will happen. Then the AGB is complete. Then there's 1 year after the application window opens, after the AGB is complete. There's comment, there's approval. But the main thing is for applicants, the requirements need to be frozen so that they have time to plan and prepare and apply under something that they understand. Now, if there is slippage of that AGB complete, I would expect that it will push the application window similarly on a 1-for-1. And then the application fee for round 1 was $185,000. ICANN has shared that roughly round 2, it'll be between $240,000 and $270,000. So that's what will happen, or what we'll see there. Once you take the timeline post-application, this is really where things are less clear, but we can go through. These are the milestones that will happen, and the estimated first delegation ICANN says is in Q2 2027. For most of the applicants, it will be in 2028 or 2029 as to when they will actually be able to get delegated. But those major milestones are, once you've submitted your application, there will be an announcement and contention sets will be revealed. There will be a lottery for evaluation priority. And this lottery is everyone actually goes to California, gets a lottery ticket, and then it's pulled. And based on luck of the draw, you will be put in batches. Obviously, everybody wants to be in the first batches because they then get to market faster. As you saw, if you were in a later batch, you were delayed almost 2 to 3 years beyond what the first group went out at. So the lottery is a very important part that you can't plan on. You take what you get. The evaluation process begins once the batches are defined, and there'll be rolling approvals. Once an approval is completed, then if you're in a contention set, all the other members of your contention set need to be completed. I believe ICANN brought all the applications into the same batch such that they would be completed at the same time. We'll talk a little bit more about auctions in a minute, but assuming you have contention set resolution, then the contract is offered for signing. The contract is signed. You go through delegation, which is technical availability of your string. You finally now get to sunrise, which is the first time you're offering your names to market in the trademark protected group of companies, and you actually sell your first name. So that'll be anywhere from 1 to 2 years after you've made your application. And then you'll have land rush, which is premium name sales, and finally get to general availability. One of the things that ICANN's doing to try and speed up the evaluation process is they're changing their approach to how they're doing registry service providers. In the original round, they did it through answering questions that the RSPs each provided their customers a set of answers for questions 23 to 44 that we'll talk about a little bit later. The applicants then took those and submitted those questions with their application, and then they were evaluated by ICANN. But that means they were evaluated 6 times. And this was inefficient. It took time. It made the process longer. And so ICANN's looking at doing a new approach whereby now they will, before the application window opens, they will review RSPs, and they'll be essentially reviewing the requirements that were in questions 23 to 44, and they'll only do that once. And so there will be a subset or a set of approved vendors. And those applicants then will get the information, and those pre-approved vendors should be announced 6 months prior to the application window. And basically this means that, if you're using one of these, your tech evaluation will be passed. Now, what are the considerations for an RSP selection? Well, one of the big things you want to do is match ethos. And by that, I mean that if you're a regional or a CC, if you're a regional or a city TLD, you may want to consider a CC TLD to be your RSP because they have an understanding of what it's like to work within a geographic boundary or work with geographic registrars, et cetera. Otherwise, if it's a generic and you're looking for a global audience, you're going to want to make sure that you have someone who understands and works within that arena as well. Domain reporting and business intelligence is critical. What information is your RSP provider going to provide you so that you can analyze what's happening in your TLD and make sound business decisions? Financial reporting is critical. What information will they provide there as well? You're going to have your own financial system to run your registry. And then what's their flexibility on offering new services? This last round really didn't have any innovation around new services that much. Some are happening now, like what .art's trying to do, but most of the registries are performing the similar services as happened before. You may consider secrecy or exclusivity. It was very important to some applicants in round 1. And so you're going to be looking for an RSP that is willing to commit to that. You need to look at the age of their platform, when they last upgraded, what's their roadmap for functionality. Obviously, I have to list cost, but cost versus level of service is going to be last, I think, because there's going to be enough vendors that you're going to get a competitive offer, but price shouldn't be what you're making your choice on. And then you can still build your own. Now, EPP is standard, but it's the edge cases that kill you. For a straightforward registration process, there are so many permutations that it becomes a challenge to have the system. So now let's look a little bit at just the questions, some of the key decisions in the application process. The applicant guidebook has roughly 50 questions. The first questions are related to the applicant itself, and who are you? What are your contact information? What are your business ID? Things like that. There is a background check. They'll look at previous convictions as well as look at cyber squatting activities in the process. The second set of questions, 13 through 22, are all string related. What is your string? Is it an IDN? How is it? What's the mission and purpose? And that's really the most critical answer that you're going to provide in this section, in which they want to know, why are you doing it? What are the benefits to users? And how do I minimize social cost? And one of the things that that you can do now is all of the round 1 applications are available on the ICANN website for the public portions. And you can look and see what mission and purpose others wrote back in 2012 as you're looking to develop your own application. The technical questions, as we talked about, will be covered by the RSP. And so that's something that they'll provide, but should not be an issue. And then if you're going to do some registry services that are non-standard, you're going to need to work with your RSP and define them and get them included. And then finally, there's the technical questions. So let's look a little bit more as to what those technical questions are. First of all, question 45, they want your financial statements. The most recent year of audited financial statements that include the balance sheet, income statement, shareholder equity, cash flow, and an auditor's certification. Now, some new gTLD applicants will be startups. They won't have audited financials. ICANN is fine with that. You just have to provide an explanation as to why. The heart of the financial application is a template, and that template requires that you have 4 elements to it. First is your most likely scenario. And you can't read it here, but you'll see in the guidebook, it covers the startup costs or the startup time before you actually get operational, and then year 1, 2, and 3. And if you remember from that delegation, some applicants had to survive 2, 3, 4, 5 years between startup cost or incurring startup costs versus getting to year 1. So you need to realize what those might look like. Then you have to provide what are your costs of operating. And those are pretty straightforward. And the real interesting part is then revenue and funding. Now, I can tell you that most business plans in round 1 were wildly optimistic. And yes, I even helped create several of those. But what you'll find now in round 2, I think, is that the evaluators will be more circumspect and expect learnings from what round 1 was, and they ought to be more muted. But what you have to have is funds to survive for 3 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because question 49 is, what's your worst case scenario? And you need to project that, as well as what are your ways you're going to overcome those barriers and make sure you have enough funding to survive a worst case scenario. And then finally, there's a letter of credit or escrow of cash to cover 3 years of critical operations. Essentially, what we'll see is that some foreign applicants had trouble with this, all the way down to like hours before the closing of the window. And so, although this is an administrative activity, it took a lot of effort in the first round. The key thing, though, is you have to demonstrate that your registry is solvent through all 3 years in all scenarios in the financials. Now let's spend a little time just quickly talking about auctions. So the auction of last resort was something ICANN really didn't want, which was they didn't necessarily want to have ICANN getting a significant amount of revenue by the resolution of contention sets, but they did get $240 million. And you can see that .web went for 135, shop for 41, app 25, and it goes down. The process that the auction of last resort was, you'd have a set of applicants, they'd all pass evaluation, there'd be an auction scheduled, there'd be a winner, they'd pay the amount of money, the losers would withdraw and go home, and ICANN would get paid. ICANN would take that to the bank. So that's the planned ICANN controlled auction. And if any applicant refused to do a self-resolution, it forced it to the auction of last resort. The winner then gets to contract. What happened is, because of self-resolution, the applicants, being very creative, came up with the concept of a private auction, where they all got together and said, okay, we're going to resolve this ourselves. We'll have a private auction, we'll have a winner. The losers all have to withdraw. And once they withdraw, we will distribute the proceeds equally to the participants. So if $5 million was paid to win the auction, each applicant who withdrew got paid $5 million or got paid $1 million for leaving. And this allowed the winner to then move to contracting. But this private auctions were sort of what I would call the unintended consequences of self-resolution, because hundreds of millions of dollars exchanged hands. There was a huge amount of liquidity that came into this process at that point in time. And I don't think that was at all expected or intended by ICANN's auction of last resort. If we look at taking that data, though, because we can't get private auction data, but we can get public auction philosophy. So if we did that, you'll see that roughly, well, you're going to get $1 million to $1.5 million for paying $185,000 to apply. And that's the challenge now going into round two, because you can see that, for a significant string like .shop had 8 applicants that went to the ICANN auction. If it would have gone private at that same number, each of those applicants would have gotten $6 million to lose, or similar for realty. And at $185,000, you can see that there's a substantial amount of incentive to try to get into something like this for returns. So there's been some ideas floated. ICANN's very concerned. The GAC's very concerned as to how can they come up with an approach that deters speculative applications. Monty Khan has been very vocal about some ideas, and this is kind of one that he shared, and I kind of like it, in the sense of it's a second blind bid, where the applicants themselves all submit a bid with their application to start, knowing that if they have a contention set, they'll go to auction, and it'll be resolved through that process. So with that, all of them must pass their initial value or their evaluation. But then at that point in time, if they've all passed, the sealed bids are opened. In this process, then there is a winner, and the losers, they have to withdraw their applications and they go home without any compensation for their effort. And the winner then pays the second bid, because not their bid, but who was the second bidder behind them, and they pay that to ICANN. ICANN does still take that to the bank, but it's likely going to be less than what it may have been. And then they proceed to contract. This is one possible model. Over the next year, we'll watch and see what happens. But the goal is to discourage that. So what are some key considerations when applying? What is your type of string? There's different requirements for each one of these. We don't have enough time today to go into each one, but they're generic, brand, geographic, community, IDN, or whether you want to restrict the registration requirements. What's your mission and purpose? What innovation or new internet use case are you bringing? And again, remember, just like we talked about with the crypto wallets or digital identity, the opportunity for round two is to move past the website and move into the human being, and how to support them with services that they need on the internet that might use a domain name. The TLD's business model is obviously critical to that: the target market, registration, pricing, premium names, the length of the string, funding. Is there enough to withstand multiple years of delay? And just remember, .music just launched, and that's a story to be heard as to the process by which Constantine went through. Your registry service provider is a key partner in your success. You've really got to take the time to make sure you find the right partner. And the likelihood of multiple applicants for your string is there. So you need to have a valuation model prior to your application, so that you know what to put. If there is a bidding approach like the one described, you may need to submit a sealed bid with your application during the upfront, and so you need to have that planned out before you make your application. And as I would advise, and many on this, get a consultant or an advisor, because this industry has a steep learning curve. Don't go it alone. Now, what are the lessons learned that I would say? One, there will be delays. Shorter the string, the better the odds. And someone else will apply for your string. If you take that mindset, you'll be prepared and not surprised. I think many people were surprised that 1,930 showed up, and how many then contention sets had to be dealt with in round one. Round one business plans were wildly optimistic. Use the data available to be able to develop a better one this time around. Finally, traditional use cases are struggling to find value. You've got to find something that will be unique. And with 1,000 TLDs already for sale, why should a registrar sell yours? And the challenge there is it's like shelf space in a supermarket. What you've got is many people vying for that search results page top to be able to sell domain names. And there are now comps out there for digital real estate, as we've talked about, whether it's DNIB, some of the tools that we'll be developing, use them to plan. And with that, I have gone through quickly the information I wanted to share. I'll open it up now for questions to make sure I know how to unmute everybody. You should be able to open up your microphones now. So I'll go to the chat and see what questions are there as well. Yes, there'll be a recording. What was the lottery cost? I think it was $100 for a ticket. You have to come to California. California has lottery rules that it will be performed by. And you physically have to be in the room when the lottery is performed. Now, in the past, some lawyers actually provided services to do that for people that were international, but that's essentially what happened. Yes, Sandy, we'll tell the dot music story. It is crazy.
Yep.
Hey, John, I had one comment, if you don't mind, related to the contention sets, the resolution, everything going to auction. As you rightly pointed out, it depends on which batch you get in to get your application evaluated. You have to wait till everybody's gone through evaluation before you can resolve the contentions.
Right. Right.
So if you're in an early batch, that's great. But if one of your applicants is in a later batch, you have to wait. Hence to your point about delays.
Yep. Yeah, right now, when will ICANN expect to start accepting applications? Right now, it's April 2026. And the application period was 3 months or 6 months, Mike? I can't remember.
The application period, somewhere in there, because it was delayed for a little while as well. So I'd say probably there was about 3 months of open application time.
Yeah. So it'll be about that long.
And John, this is Sandy, should you just wait until it opens, or is there any pre-work that someone should be doing?
Huge amount of pre-work, because the questions themselves require some thought, but mainly around the business model of the TLD that you'll be offering, as well as finding an RSP, registry services provider that will match with you. And then as I talked about, if there's contention, you have to build a valuation model associated with what you think that TLD will be worth, because you may need to submit, well, if ICANN adopts that second bid model, each applicant would need to add that to their information submitted as an application. Those aren't going to be easy questions at all. Rob, I'm not gonna, the question is from Rob, what's a realistic timeline? I can only go back on what happened in the prior. It was a 2-year delay from when they announced it. And it really was, I think, driven by the CEO and the chair finally saying enough, and decided that they were going to hold ICANN to accountability and launch the program. And I think that's really where this will come to as well. I hear background noise about a possible price reduction for a .brand application. Will that probably be 240K instead of the 185? You know, Gene, I don't know about a differentiated price for brands, maybe, but you'd have to say that their evaluation is cheaper, and therefore it could be done at less cost, and therefore their application should be less. Um, that I don't know. Don't know. Where can you provide input to the ICANN bidding model? Just do that through the feedback that's going on currently. ICANN will be posting different parts of the applicant guidebook, as well as talk to your GAC rep. Every applicant will be housed within a geographic region that has a government advisory council rep. You'll want to talk to them because they're ones that are really pushing for it. And then just, obviously giving ICANN your feedback. Ah, Jotham, good to see you. Three-parter. What do you anticipate is the quantity of the applications? How much impact on the quantity of applications do you believe? Yeah. So ICANN did their financial modeling to come up with the roughly $270,000 application fee, assuming 2,000 applications. That's what they thought. I know that at least my thinking back when we were developing the evaluation panels was maybe 500. Oh, my email has a typo. Great. Oh yeah, there's no N there. Thanks, Jonathan. I was just going to spell out your name. So how many? I think there is going to be a lot. Brands, I'm still trying to struggle with the fact that 100 brands have deleted themselves. What are going to be the 500 or 600 brands that might come in? But I think that might be it. 500 to 600 brands. That then moves to regions. I think regions and cities are also going to be an interesting one, or should be, and that would be a couple hundred. And then you get to, at most a couple hundred, because you're getting to small cities that may not be able to tolerate it. But then you get to the generics. And I think, as you saw in the technology and social and cultural topics that have evolved in the market since 2012, I think there are going to be plenty of entrepreneurs that are going to say, I can do it. And so I think you're gonna see 2,000, possibly, maybe more. Oh, what didn't we ask that we should have? Gosh, Sandy, you always ask great questions. The business model is really the core of why you can make money at this. The domain name industry is harder than people think to make money. Selling domains is hard. Ask Ray King of .design. He went to every design activity for years, just making sure people knew what was going on. It's just a real challenge, and this isn't for the faint of heart. Hi, Jose Ernesto. Do I see a big player coming in on this round, like donut style? Probably. Back then, nobody can, I don't know. Mike, you may have, some of the others may have. I did not think someone was going to apply for 300. There was talk that Google actually thought about applying for thousands and then thought better of it because they didn't want to look at like they were buying the internet. But when you look at, especially if you look at, let me show a graph here. So this displays the tool that I've developed that that allows me to analyze all TLDs in the market, gTLDs in the market right now by renewal rate, by deletes, et cetera. And there's now 1,200 TLDs shown here. But what I can also do is go down and look at, shoot, where's my next one? Here, I can look at Identity Digital's 267 TLDs. And the economic value that they are driving out of this long tail is quite substantial. And even though they have to pay ICANN fees of 25,000 a year, they're able to overcome the inertia financially. So I do believe there is going to be a big player that is going to come in and try to duplicate that. But you're going to have to find enough strings that make sense. I think that people also got some smelling salts around, not all these strings make sense, and that's going to be a challenge.
Hey, John, can I just clarify, when you said that there was a lot of revenue in the long tail there, what do you mean by that? Could you clarify how the revenue was driven on the long tail?
Sure. So, when you look at these little spikes right here, you can see why they have a 64% renewal rate on average, because they don't have an awful lot of excess. If you saw XYZ had a huge spike in several of its TLDs because they're not getting renewed. So they're most likely selling them at a decent price. So they're getting a good first year price for these lesser size TLDs, and they're getting a high renewal rate. And so if you have 10,000 domains sold and you're selling them for $20 a domain wholesale, that's $200,000 that you're paying $25,000 ICANN fee on. And so if you have 100 TLDs that are getting 10,000 domains, you're making a good chunk of change.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Jotham, do you anticipate the impact of this next round where there might be some brands shed their timidity about launching? Well, yeah, so yes, because there's a winner out there in the brand space, and that's Leclerc from round one. I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't have enough time in the presentation. But Leclerc is a $50 billion retailer in France that applied for .Leclerc. And in their application, they said they wanted to be at the top of the DNS, trustworthy, secure environment, combat phishing, enable secure payments, and prevent cyber squatting. And here's what they did. They were on eleclerc.com all the way through 2020. And they made a massive technology shift, and they launched about 100 second level domains, as well as eLeclerc, their primary domain, and transitioned successfully off of eleclerc.com to e.leclerc, lost a little bit of traffic, but then regained it. And this is one example, only one out of 490 brands that actually now today, a $50 billion retailer runs their infrastructure on their own TLD. And I really believe that this is an example that other brands can look at to say it can be done. Now, each has to decide, should it be done? Do they want it? But this is how it can be done. And Afnick and Matthews on and some other people did a great job in supporting them get there. Folks, it's 3 o'clock. I want to respect your time. I'm going to stay on for a little while. Anybody that wants to stay on and ask more questions, you can unmute. Feel free to unmute. I don't think I have the mute all on. So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to join today. And like I said, I'll hang around and be happy to chat. Take care. Hello, somebody there?
Hey, John, I have one more question. What was the kind of the biggest mistake that people made applying? Like, was there, like, if you did like a pattern recognition, was it, lack of a solid business plan? Was it wrong, wrong strings? Were there like two or three things that people commonly made the mistake of that you wouldn't want to have anybody repeat?
Probably, yeah. And to everybody else, I will share the recording. Common mistake probably was the business planning. Overestimating what they were going to get, and then overpricing, especially premium names, thinking they had more value in their digital real estate than the market put on it. And that caused over exuberant auction prices where people paid significant dollars for getting their contention set, I think. But that's probably what I would say was the most common mistake. Yeah.
Okay,
Hey,
thank
John,
you.
can you talk about your yoga experience?
Well, there's a couple experiences that happened with .yoga, Mike. But I thought that there was so .yoga is a great string. I love it. And early on, I was working with MMX, and I went out and I began going on Instagram, Twitter, and finding out who had .yoga domains and interacting with them directly. And I found this girl, Crystal, who had crystal.yoga. And I mean, she was so passionate about the fact that she had a TLD and she had a domain name that reflected what she did as yoga instructor. And so I thought that there was going to be a way to create a viral approach to be able to go out and find yoga studios on Twitter and on Instagram, follow them because they have .com or they have .net or they have .ca or they have, and be able to then share with them that there's a .yoga out there, and create this whole virtual cycle. Fell flat on its face, got no real traction from it. Today, maybe that's something that could be done. But and Mike, if I didn't hit what you were saying, I'm sorry.
No, you did. I think it was just how when you looked at yoga and you looked at how many practitioners there are out there, you would think that would be a great domain for people to take off on, and it was challenging.
Yeah, very challenging. I mean, we got it. It would be in that category of a solid, niche TLD. It's going to have great renewal rates. It's going to have strong performance, for what it is. And if you have 267 of those, you're going to make a boatload of money. If you have one of those, you're going to be challenged. All right, I'm going to stop the recording there.